So part of what I'm hoping you get out of all of this is the notion that our answers to sort of serious, complex questions are always contextualized. Now, is that something you need to know for this class? Yes, absolutely. This is an important thing. It's why I'm going over it, so that we can understand how context works, so that you can, write things using this kind of terminology, and you can think of problems in this kind of way and come up with solutions that are viable inside of a humanities framework, of course. Is this solution, or is this kind of thinking useful outside of this class? Well, I hope we'd all argue that it is. That when we go out into the real world, one of the things we discover is just how often meaning is contextualized to people, to situations, to cultures, that this is something we encounter out in the real world as we're walking around in far more frequent encounters than you would encounter things like math, right? Like, you're constantly having to think about, what does this mean inside the context of this, inside the context of that. No answer ever seems to present itself on life's really serious questions in such a way that it's definitive, so that it's absolute. And that's what we're trying to get at by talking about the solutions or the investigations into art, and using context to sort of frame that conversation. And so far we use context to frame a conversation about how you analyze artwork. But the reality is, art itself is also created inside of contextual frameworks. And I think we would be remiss if we think that there's just this thing, this art that's hanging on the wall or something, and you show up and you find all the context that it might, you contextualize your interpretation of that art in such a way that it makes sense, and ignore the fact that the art didn't just appear on the wall yesterday, right, out of thin air, that it was contextualized inside of its creation. Now, I don't want to get too far into this, because I know that there are great fears about sort of ignorance of, like, well, I don't know the culture they created, and I've already kind of encountered those questions and attempted to give you some sort of counter-argument to that kind of thinking. But what I will say is that thinking about how the art is interacting with you can sometimes help to present interpretations of the art. This list, again, is not meant to be exhaustive, but I would at least like to point out a few factors that people take into account when they are considering the function of art and how we should interpret it, that are sort of extra artistic. In other words, they're not embedded in the painting. They are sort of surrounding its reception or its creation. Okay, how it is received or how it is created. Like, for instance, the Mona Lisa, right? You've seen the Mona Lisa, I assume, right? At some point, you probably saw an image of the Mona Lisa. Maybe you saw it on your television screen. Perhaps you saw it on your computer screen. Is it a different reception to go to the Louvre and see the Mona Lisa, the actual Mona Lisa? Right? Is it a different reception when you know that you are in a crowd of like 200 people all jockeying to get to the front so they can snap their picture of the Mona Lisa, and you're like elbow to elbow trying to fight your way to the front to see that painting? Does it change your reception of the Mona Lisa? And I think you have to say, yeah, it does. Right? It absolutely does change my appreciation of, or even just how I receive it. Not even my appreciation, just the experience of experiencing the art, right, is altered based off of what I have to do, or how that all plays out. I gave as an example of this week. I wanted to point out, and now is the time. I asked you to read the lyrics to Cemetery Polka by Tom Waits at some point. Now I'd like you to listen to it, and I'll wait. Like right here, pause it and play Cemetery Polka and compare them to the experience of listening to the lyrics. 1, 2, 3. Okay, you've done it. Now, how different is the experience of seeing that performance of Tom Waits doing Cemetery Polka from reading the lyrics? I imagine there's a world of difference. Like, you never would have imagined it was going to sound like that, right? Whether you liked it or not, I don't care. The reality is, though, that it sounded so odd and creepy and carnivalesque and just something wrong with it, right? Imagine if you had been live at that concert, right? Does that change your reception of it? What if you recognize that that's one of the guys on the horn is it a horn? Is he? This guy from E Street Band. It's a guy from Bruce Springsteen's band is playing in there. You can see him in the background. The guy who played with Letterman. Max. I can't remember his name. Does that change your conception of this art? Knowing that, there's probably plenty of recordings of Cemetery Polka, and you could read the lyrics, but this is the one that went, crazy. Does that change your version of it? Is it the performance versus, getting it on a CD or reading the lyrics, etc., right? Does it change your perception when art is meant to be public or private? What if the art is only meant for the artist? How does that change the way we interpret the art, right? Because, of course, it does. It must. If we assume that the art was never meant to be given to a bunch of people. Or what if it was? How do we interpret art when we know that it's meant to be given to as many people as possible? I mean, for instance, you think let me give you an example here. I mentioned Taylor Swift songs before. I think they are extremely pop art. Like, they are designed to please as many people as they possibly can at one time. And you might go, well, I don't like Taylor Swift, or I only listen to Taylor Swift ironically, or something. I don't know what the hell, but you might think that. That's fine. But do we consider it good in its capacity to appeal to the largest number of people possible? Like, is that a quality that we can analyze? Like, if I look at Taylor Swift songs, right? Or movies about superheroes right now, one of the things I could say is I could use that to analyze the culture, American culture. What does it want? What does it look for? What does it like? What does it fear? What are its angst? What are its anxieties? Right? Watching a movie like Iron Man or Civil War or Guardians of the Galaxy, or listening to Taylor Swift. How do I or Sharknado? What an amazingly popular, everybody's seen Sharknado for some stupid reason, right? How does that reflect an entire culture? You might say it's crappy music. No one likes Taylor Swift, but in that capacity, it is incredibly useful. Whereas if I say, hey, listen, I would like to analyze the films of Ingmar Bergman, and we will use those to describe American culture. What? No, you won't. Who's seen them? A select few? Woody Allen? That's about it? You can't do that, right? That would be weird. I'm going to analyze American culture by looking at the novels of Thomas Pynchon. No, you aren't. Very few people have read Thomas Pynchon. They are indifferent to Thomas Pynchon. You cannot talk about, a general trend in people's attitudes across the board. And so one of the things is thinking about how this context of the art works. It allows you to put different contexts into your analysis. What is it you think you're looking at when you look at a Taylor Swift song? You're certainly not trying to decode it for some sort of I don't know, higher value of intrinsic awesomeness or anything like that. I hope you aren't. Maybe you are. I'm not trying to knock your tastes. But you definitely can use a Taylor Swift song to tell what American culture looks like. It's like propaganda. Looking at that poster, is that great art? No, but it tells us a lot about how people generally think. Now, Tom Waits, he's a weird one, right? Look at that guy. He's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He's got a huge fan base and has since the 1970s. He's played before the Dalai Lama. And yet, that is definitely not popular music. It's not there. And finally, what I would kind of argue for, and these things are going to come up again as we start looking at things, is something like, is the art functional, i.e., is it an artistic version of something that we have, a regular use for, or is its regular use just art? And this is incredibly complicated once we get into things like advertising, right? Like, how awesome is the Beatles' music until it's turned into a Nike commercial? How wonderful is, that's just the way it works out. You have trouble with this functionality. Art gets put to that function, right? But there is some art that absolutely has function always, right? Architecture, for instance. Architecture is nothing but function. Philosophy, as it turns out, is really nothing but function. Philosophy and architecture, even though they seem like they would be completely different, are actually very similar in some ways, because both of them are designed to just kind of stand alone. It'd be very hard to talk about, well, Aristotle is a better writer than, Ralph Waldo Emerson. I don't think most people would accept that as a proper way to analyze how philosophy works. You're looking at things like insight. Philosophy is very insightful. A building that looks beautiful but falls down isn't a good building. So that also plays into the concept of sort of, functions and art, functionality and artistic value. And I guess lastly I would say this, it's really difficult to think of art as standing alone. So often what we think about is art standing inside of a genre. But where do genres really live? Like if I say, okay, music. So all music, that's a genre of art. Music, G-E-N-R-E, for those of you who are wondering how to spell that, genre. If we talk about music as a genre of art, obviously you have, that's going on. But what about all the songs by Tom Waits? Right? Is there a way in which we can use those to sort of analyze this particular song, the way it maintains or deviates from a pattern? Well, of course, because remember way back when I first described, yesterday, this class is so fast, way back when I was saying that all you're looking for are things that deviate from a pattern of normalcy, right? And that's how you get descriptive statements. Well, what if the normalcy is the normalcy of Tom Waits songs, right? Then we can talk about how this song, more or less, sounds like other Tom Waits songs. Or we could do Tom Waits, Rembrandt, right? Look at Rembrandt's paintings. We don't have to talk about them in terms of how they deviate from the norm of other paintings. We could also talk about them on how they deviate from the norm of other Rembrandt paintings. That makes sense. So all of these are also available in terms of how art is contextualized before we also contextualize our interpretations. And yeah, all of this is amazingly complicated. It is. And the only answer I can give you in terms of well then, what do we do with it, is you jump in. The waves are moving whither and nigh, and everything is going, and it's all crazy. The water surface is turbulent. Whatever will we do? You jump in. That's all you can do, is go in, do what you can, find the meanings you can, rely on your method, descriptive statements, evaluative statements, contextualized statements. Get what you can and get out. And maybe next time you'll get more. And the time after that you'll get a bit more, and the time after that you'll get a bit more, and guess what? It all builds off each other. But the one thing you have that's reliable is this methodology. And the things that you can analyze with it are everything. Okay? All right.